Far away from the heartlands of Islam, Muslims in South and Southeast Asia make up nearly 2/3 of the global Muslim population. The emergence of the religion was in the early era of Islam, but no one could have predicted the explosive effect it would have. Asia Wired looks at the seeds, the growth and the blossoming of Islam, which has defined the region as we see it today. Speaking to its experts on the Muslim heritage of this culturally rich part of the world. In this episode, we look at India, the 7th largest country in the world and the 3rd in Asia. Its population comprises of a mammoth 1.3 billion people, which is about 1/5 of the world. The Muslim community make up the 2nd largest religious group in the country, with over 170 million followers. We spoke to Dr. Mohammed Ziauddin Ahmed Shakeb, who is a historian specialising in Indo-Islamic and Indo-Persian history, having taught the subject at the School of Oriental and African Studies in London. So thank you, Dr. Shakeb, for joining us. As you may know, India has one of the largest Muslim populations in the world. A recent study has said that by 2050, it will surpass Indonesia as the world's largest Muslim population. So tell us about the origins of this hugely influential populace.
Yes, first of all, we should define what is India, because if you go back into history, India means the entire subcontinent, which includes present Bangladesh and Pakistan and eastern Afghanistan. That was all part of India. And in that, before the advent of the Muslims, there was a Hindu society, and it has its own structure. And centuries before that, one leading Indian sociologist, Manu, he proposed a shape for the Indian society, and that was the caste-ridden shape, dividing people into Brahmins, Brahmakshatris, and Shudras and Vaishyas. And all these 4 classes had different duties. The lowest society was only has physical work. They were not at all skilled, and they were not very creative. All other classes were productive, and they are respected. And as you go on, and they socially naturally, economically they were not equal, but socially they were not equal. They were supposed these human species of different levels, and equality was totally absent in that system. But that was not peculiar to India itself. Even Plato in his days, he said that children should be tested at a very young age, and copper should be sent to copper and gold to gold. That wasn't classical thinking, but it took a very practical shape in India, and it affected the society. And it continued until 1947. When I used to go to school, when in my boyhood, I know every Indian city, every Indian town, a village had got areas inhabited by carpenters, ironsmiths, goldsmiths, weavers, milkmen, and professionals like that. And their areas were marked by that. And in my school, there was no cobbler, there was no sunar or goldsmith in my class. Only some Brahmin boys, mostly the Muslims, and some kayastas. They were in education. Once I asked this boy, I remember when I was 10 or 12 years old, he was quite friendly. So I said, which class you are, and where do you go to school? He said, why, I don't go to school, I am a chamar, I am a cobbler. So it means they had no idea for education. So that was the caste-ridden society, that in that equality suffered, and that made justice impossible. And the lower classes of the society were suffering a lot. Modern Indian historians may deny this fact, because there is a developing tendency of reinterpreting Indian history according to their own whims and fancies. But this is the fact which all other historians are agreed. So this made ways for the foreigners to come in, and Islam which was spreading, and it had the concept of one God and one man. All the men and women are the children of Adam and Eve. So that was a very broad concept of equality. With that, when they came to India, they had to have the rule of law. The rule of law is introduced by Dicey in the West. It is a very recent concept. It is recent for the West, but it is right from the beginning, it is inherent in Islam. So everyone was equal before law. When it came there, so it made the people, the downtrodden people, very happy, and they started fostering Islam.
So tell us about how Islam came, because you talk about...
Yeah, Islam entered in the subcontinent through different routes. First of all, there were connections between Arabia and India, even before Islam, particularly in the south. And Arab traders used to come to the southwestern coast of now present Kerala, and some of them used to go even round the Bay of Bengal. And there are evidences that they brought Islam during the lifetime of Prophet Muhammad. There is one Malayalam manuscript which records that one of the Raja, whose name was Chakravati, he witnessed the Prophet's miracle of splitting of moon, and he sent a special delegation to the Prophet. And so that shows one evidence. There are many other evidences which are hard to believe, but in Patna, in Bengal, in UP, Gujarat, and in the Deccan, there are evidences that there are Muslim saints who came at the very outset of Islam. But very important of them is Abu Tamim Ansari, who was a companion of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. His tomb is in Madras, in south. And there is another Sahabi is reported to have been buried in Kerala. And if you go to Thatta in Sindh, there is a Makli hill. There are tombs of 100,000 Muslim saints. Among them, there are, if not Sahabis, at least a dozen of Tabi'is, those who are the followers
So
of
you're
Sahabi.
saying India, well, pre-modern India, came into contact with the companions?
Yes, of course. It was in contact with them through Sufis and Muslim missionaries.
So now moving on to the next phase of Muslim influence in the continent. In terms of Muslim rule in India, which of course had a massive impact in terms of politically, socially and culturally. How did this begin?
Yes, since Iran was a part of Islamic Empire, which was very close to Sindh, so it is reported that one of the Rajas of Sindh, or his people, they looted and kidnapped some Muslim ladies. So Muhammad bin Qasim was sent to revenge. He invaded and he demolished his power. He was arrested and he set up Islamic rule in very early during the Umayyad period, and he was just 17 years old. But he did not demolish any temple. Muhammad bin Qasim said, "We have churches and synagogues in Arabia, we have fire temples in Iran, and they will be having their own temples in India. We are not going to demolish them." That was his policy. But on the other hand, he had done many things for bringing justice to the people and serving with their rule of equality. It was very encouraging. And when it comes that people are receiving justice and equal treatment, it leads to conversion. So some conversion in Sindh started taking place. After Muhammad Qasim, Ghazni started invading. He is reported to have invaded 17 times, but he was not interested in ruling. He always invaded and looted and he went away. He came all the way from Ghazni and invaded at Gujarat for only one temple, that was Somnath. The legend behind was that there was an idol called Manath in Kaaba. And when Prophet, after the conquest of Mecca, he entered Kaaba, he saw so many idols, and with his stick he pointed out to remove them all, and they were all taken away and thrown out. But the idol of Manath was taken away by the Hazramids, and ultimately it was brought to India and was erected there. So Mahmud thought it his duty to demolish it. Otherwise, on his way, he did not demolish any other temple. But there is a legend. And the evidence which I said, I found it in the contemporary Persian poetry of the Anbari and others, but not in serious chroniclers. But a legend stands like this. After him, one of his military men, Shahabuddin Ghori, he invaded India, he conquered it, but he didn't have time or nerves to rule. He left one of his slaves to rule India, and he was Qutbuddin Aibak, who started from 1206. That was the first Muslim ruler, and he set his capital first at Lahore and then Delhi, brought lots of scholars, and since he was a patron of Islamic culture, his scholars started pouring in from Arabia and Iran, and they settled around Delhi, and they started building up mosques. And in Delhi, he built the largest mosque, the power of Islam, Masjid Quwwatul Islam. One of its minaret is Qutub Minar, the loftiest minar, of which even India is very proud. And all around Qutub Minar, it is built of yellow stone. You have got embossed and carved Quranic verses in Kufic script, and very beautiful. So in that way, a new architecture, a new art, it was also being introduced. When we say Islam, of course it is a message of one God, it is a message of the Prophet, it is a message of equality of law, it is the message of the equality of mankind. But at the same time, Muslim society had been very creative. It was assimilative, and it was able to dispense with new ideas. So a new culture started developing in India.
So now we move on to the Mughal Empire, which of course is one of the most influential parts of this history. Could you elaborate more on this?
Yes. Mughals, when they came to power, they came from Central Asia, having Central Asian traditions. They were not Arabs. They had got a different frame of mind, very cooperative, very tolerant, and very creative. And their aesthetic sense was far advanced. So when they came to power, so they started synthesizing Islamic culture with the Indian culture. Babur was tolerant. Humayun had got two periods of his rule, but both Babur and Humayun continued their power in India, supported by Iran. But when Akbar came to power at a very young age,
so these are the rulers, Mughal
rulers, first and second. The third was Akbar, who had got the longest rule of about 50 years. And Akbar tried to synthesize Hindu culture and Muslim culture, particularly at the religious level. And then he invented his own religion, Din-e-Ilahi. And he assumed to be a demigod or a god. Lots of things happened in that. And there were scholars like Sheikh Ahmad Sarhindi and Abdullah Muhaddis Dehlavi. They stood and they resisted Akbar. But the Sufi saint Salim Chishti, to whom Khaneqa, shrine, Akbar went bare feet in Fatehpur Sikri on a hilltop to request him that Akbar didn't have a male issue. Salim Chishti said, okay, I will pray for you, but you are a god yourself. Akbar felt ashamed. He said, no, I'm not. So Salim Chishti said, so if you stop your religion and make me two promises that you will have a son. If you have a son, he will follow Islam, and you will keep him in my place for training, not in your palace. So that is why Jahangir was born, and Jahangir was kept at the little Khanaqah of Salim Chishti, but how could a prince live there? So the great fort of Fatehpur Sikri was built around Khanaqah, close to Khanaqah, and that is why Jahangir is called Salim, and Akbar used to call him Sheikhu. So Jahangir is supposed to have been the revival of Islam in the Mughal Empire. And then they were the great patrons of poetry, literature, and the soft side of Islamic culture, art and architecture. The most beautiful buildings like Taj Mahal, the Red Fort, Safdarjung, Shalimar, all these were built during the times of Jahangir and Shah Jahan. Aurangzeb's time, these things were not there. Aurangzeb spent most of his time in consolidating and expanding his empire. He expanded from Assam to Gujarat. He expanded from Kashmir down to Madras, but he wanted to conquer Tibet. But he did not leave any good successor. He was a man of a very suspicious nature, never relied on anyone. But anyway, he expanded his empire, and since the time of Asoka, Aurangzeb's reign was a time when even the Hindus are proud that India was united very strongly, and eastern Afghanistan was the Mughal province of Kabul. So it was very huge, and that was the India which was taken over by the British, which we shall talk later.
So, just in terms of the controversies of Aurangzeb, could you elaborate some of the sort of controversies surrounding him?
Aurangzeb is a very complicated, controversial figure because he is defamed that he was anti-Shia. But I don't think it is a right charge, because during his 50 years rule, there had been 137 subedars all over India. Out of them, 134 were Shias and 2 were Sunnis, 1 Hindu who was his uncle. That is not true. But Aurangzeb, I can see that he would not tolerate any power, anything, even a spark. He would think it may burn, it may grow into a flame. So there were 5 kingdoms in South India: Bijapur, Ahmednagar, Golconda, and they were the tributaries. Aurangzeb could continue receiving their tribute, but he invaded them, annexed them to the Mughal Empire, and arrested their rulers or killed them. So this was a mistake. And burst of the things, he destroyed all those fantastic buildings and culture which was there. Itself is a huge subject to discuss. So what Aurangzeb destroyed, it is a huge subject. And what he did, he left a consolidated empire in the hands, naturally, to be taken over by the British.
So now, of course, the Mughal Empire lasted for about 2 centuries. What led to its eventual collapse and disintegration?
The thing, India most of the time remained into small powers. Before Mughals, there were so many small sultanates, kingdoms in Bihar, in Gujarat, in Punjab, in South India. So again, India got shattered into small potentates and different states. And post-Aurangzeb period, the successors of Aurangzeb were very inept. They were not capable of controlling this entire power and the great empire. So empire started tottering, and the provincial rulers, they started becoming autonomous. And there is a legend that a few decades after Aurangzeb, the Nawab of Awadh, Lucknow, Asif ud-Dawla, he claimed that he is a king. The news was brought to Shah Alam, that so-called Mughal emperor, my lord, Now Abdullah calls himself a king now. And he said, let him call. If he's a king, I'm an emperor. So like that. So they were all becoming emperor, independent, and at the same time they were supporting the center. And this was a period when the European seafarers started intruding in India, because in 1492, Vasco da Gama had reached the western coast of India in Calicut, guided by a Muslim seafarer, Abdul Majid. But the credit goes to Vasco da Gama. So Majid was a great sailor, and his books are very important. We don't have any book for Vasco da Gama, but for Majid we have got lots of things. So, and then with Vasco da Gama, Portuguese started the seafaring, and they came throughout, and Portuguese preferred to rule in overseas, through seas, and they built up their oceanic empires, 5 oceanic empires, and they used to live on coastal areas. They did not like to go into the interiors, but they were good businessmen, they were traders, and the religious, it is related again to Crusade war and Muslim and Christian hatred. They would take in their ships lots of Muslims for Hajj pilgrim, and they would drown them in the sea. So lots of things, and the reports would come to the Indian rulers. Ultimately, the Portuguese power was brought down, not only by the Indian forces, but also the European sea traders. After Portuguese, there started the Dutch, the Danes, the British, and the French. And they reached India. And the earliest British settlement in India we find some about 1640. But since Thomas Roe went to India during the time of Akbar, Jahangir, so now the British historians are rewriting Indian history, that British Raj begins from 1605. So that is a way of interpreting history.
So tell us about the sort of influence that, or impact that the British Raj had on.
Islam took the Indian society. I don't want to get into political things. Islam took Indian society into one stage of introducing human equality and the rule of law. The other thing, for open education, because in India the education was the prerogative of Brahmins only. Except Brahman, no one was allowed to learn. Even if a non-Brahman Hindu listened to a lesson of a Brahman, they would melt lead and put in his ear. That was the punishment. So education was restricted only to Brahmins, and no one else could learn except their technique of their art. That's all, not the bookish education. But the Muslims, when they came, they kept it open for everyone. So lots of non-Muslims, they learned Persian. Even Guru Nanak, he wrote everything in Persian, nothing in any other language. And among the Hindus, there were great scholars and poets were born. During the time of Shah Jahan, Chandrabhan Brahman was a very eloquent poet. His poetry is beautiful, and his collection is there in British Library and other libraries, and many others like that. So Hindus started learning, and in some parts of India, like Golconda, any Brahmin who learned Persian, he deserved a stipend. He passed the Persian test, and then whether or not he had a work, just for his knowing Persian, he would receive a stipend every month. So in that way, the education was popularized, but was not made compulsory. When the British came, British introduced a different thing. The British introduced modern education, and there was a lot of difference in Islamic education and British education. Then again, here I must say during the last days of the Muslim rule in India, the Muslims also destroyed their judicial system. And even during the time of Aurangzeb, if they wanted to invade against Islamic kingdom, he would take fatwa, and just to please the emperor, a fatwa was given there, yes, you can invade him and you can kill him. So the law, justice was not virtually there. Since the Muslims failed in justice, and the qazis, who were the traditional judges, they earned a very bad name of being unjust and selling justice. Then the British came, and the first thing that the British did, they reformed justice. Lord William Bentinck, he set up Roman law, British judicial system, and then people gained a new hope that now the people are here who will give us justice, which they were not receiving from Muslims. So in that way the British started becoming popular, and they make education not only open, but they introduced the schools in villages and at different levels to educate the masses. So now at the beginning, the Indians did not care much for that because they were happy with their professional guild. But now it so happened that over a century, until 1947, a certain percentage of Hindus was educated at primary basic levels, and then in 1919 universities were introduced in India. University education was a great revolution in Indian history, because the Muslims and Hindu syllabus was very small, very slim syllabus and very limited, which is still continued in the religious schools of Hindus and Muslims. Quran and its exegesis, hadith, the traditions of Prophet, fiqh, the jurisprudence, and a few basic things, and there ends the matter. The education was completed at the age of 16. But when the British came, they introduced geography, world geography. They introduced history. They introduced social sciences. They introduced, above all, the natural sciences, physics, chemistry, biology, and all these things. They were absolutely unknown to the Indian society, whether Hindus or Muslims. And that brought the new light, the enlightenment, and with that it affected religious interpretations, it affected faith, it affected a style of life, and it is still affecting until today. And the combination of modernity and religion is a great problem for every young Muslim and a young Hindu. So that is there. But this was the gift brought by the British. And with the university education, the administration changed. And now, since partition, so much education is there that all old professional guilds, they have gone, because with the development of education there was the development of science and technology and industry that destroyed all the cobblers and jewelers and weavers. Nothing handmade is there. If it is there for fun, the small industry is there. Everything has been industrialized. The entire way of life throughout India has now been absolutely changed. The kitchen is not the same kitchen which was 50 years ago. The bathroom is not the same bathroom which was 50 years ago. The bedroom is not the same. The house structure is not the same. The dress is not the same. So everything has changed. So that is the gift of the British.
But you say it's a gift of the British, but what eventually led to the expulsion of the British?
Yeah, of course the British culture and the British introduction of modernity is welcome, but the British rule over India, it was intolerable. So Indians fought against that, both Hindus and Muslims together. And the British ultimately decided to leave the country, but they created internal friction, and then the country was divided, and there are three parties to this division: Hindus, Muslims, and English, and the credit or discredit equally goes to all the three.
So you're talking about the Partition of India. What sort of impact has it had on that particular issue until the modern day?
It has got a very bad effect, because it divided the Muslims. The India had the largest Muslim population, from which you started the interview. But now part of them has gone to Afghanistan, part of them to Pakistan, part of them to Bangladesh, and now a certain portion of them is in India. In the United India, had it been there, so you could understand the strength of their population. So that was one way. It was very harmful for the Muslims, and they became weaker in India and Pakistan and everywhere.
So now, of course, come to the modern day India. So today, of course, Islam is a minority religion, although very large. So what's the status of Muslims now, living under, you could say, secular Indian rule, and how has the schisms in the past sort of affected the present day relations between the different communities?
The communities, they have to live together. They eat the same food, they dress alike, they work together all through India. But there are politicians, it is their own interest. So they are trying to, in the past, the British used to divide, and now the Indians themselves, not all of them, some political parties, they divide them together. But it is very harmful for India. It may not work. India, in the beginning, secularism was very much hated by the Muslims because they didn't understand its meaning. But now they have understood the meaning of secularism. Secularism does not mean that you become irreligious. Secularism means that you should not affect others with your faith, not actually for discriminate on grounds of faith. So that is not there. The Muslims have understood it. They are active in all political parties, and they are in industry. They are in every field, both men and women. But India is going ahead, and every country has problems, and I'm sure India will come out of that, because the Muslim strength is quite a lot. Ignoring Muslims, no political party can win. They are a very important part, and Muslims are aware of that. And now they know how to play their cards. So if a country has a problem, so Britain has problems, every country has problems. So we should not exaggerate it. India is moving very well. It's economically is far better than Europe. So lots of good things are there.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Shakeb, for joining us. Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.